Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RN Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Fighting on Film. This week we're going to be covering Bataan from 1943. It's an MGM picture directed by Tay Garnett, and it was written by Robert Hardy Andrews. And it basically follows a ragtag platoon of men as they defend a bridge.
Yeah. Well, they're like trying to deny the Japanese the right to rebuild the bridge, aren't they? It's like a Last Stand movie, isn't it? You know, it's like the first.
Definitely Last Stand movie.
We recently celebrated Rorke's Drift, did the anniversary of that, and it's a little bit like that, isn't it? They're waiting for a more dominant force to come. But yeah, production wise, produced by MGM. Again, last week's Go for Broke was MGM as well. Very prolific in this genre that we've found. It's interesting enough, fearing a lawsuit from RKO on a film by John Ford.
Lost Patrol.
I think they bought the rights to it for like $6,500, so they wouldn't have a lawsuit. And the executive producer, Don Cherry, wrote in his autobiography that it was basically just a loose remake.
Lost Patrol is sort of like the genus of like a subgenre of war movies, in that it's a small group of men defending a single position, and you get a lot of these like Lost Astam sort of like movies. So from Lost Patrol, you get Sahara with Humphrey Bogart, and then there's a couple of others, and then obviously Bataan they obviously were concerned enough to buy the rights to the movie. So it's sort of like it's the progenitor of like these various different war movies that came afterwards that sort of like have that same focus on a small group of men defending one position. I suppose that's a good point to go into with the historical context of this movie is and what it's actually portraying. So
yeah, definitely.
The film Bataan is sort of a microcosm within the Battle of Bataan, which is the fighting retreat in the face of Japanese forces in Bataan. That saw lots of small infantry battles, hand-to-hand fighting, really scrappy, very close-quarter engagements. And there's lots of elements from that battle that sort of make it into some of the set pieces within Bataan.
Yeah.
So later on, I'll probably mention it again, but there was a Filipino soldier who was with the Philippine Scout, and he won the Distinguished Service Cross for beating off a Japanese attack with a Browning medium machine gun before he got into bayonet fighting. So he basically, the gun jammed, he drew his 1911 pistol, killed a handful more of the attacking enemy, and then was basically hand-to-hand really badly wounded. This week's actually the anniversary of some of the heaviest fighting during the Battle of Bataan. So we thought taking a look at 1943's Bataan would be a good way to sort of look back on that as well.
Yeah. But interesting enough, Matt, it comes out in like June 1943 as well. So it's only like a year, just over a year to the actual fighting itself. Yeah. So, it's quite a rare thing, really. I mean, there are British movies that are shot during the war as well, and there are American movies shot during the war, but not usually this close together.
No, they don't normally cover the event that's just happened so quickly. Obviously, we've covered Theirs Is the Glory, which does just that, but that wasn't a wartime movie, that was a post-war movie.
Propaganda piece again. And actually the MGM had help from the OWI, which was basically the United States version of the Ministry of Information.
All right, okay.
So they, I think it was post 42-ish, something like that. The early, mid-war, they allowed. Basically, they said they would help with script doctoring and things like that. So they would say, look, change this, keep that. Not really censorship, but sort of just saying, yes, this will help the war effort. Oh, this bit won't. Right.
Yeah, like a guiding hand.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, and they actually, as we'll see later, they really approved of the way that the American soldiers were represented during the picture itself.
Yeah, just jumping off that, I mean, it's a very diverse cast, and the actual soldiers that the cast is portraying are all quite varied. We've got Filipinos, we have a black soldier, which is rare. An era of segregation still within the US Army, so it's very rare that you'd have that on-screen depiction of a black soldier in with other white soldiers. And then we have obviously all the Filipino army elements that are in there, of
course,
as well.
But that's what makes this film it makes it unique and makes it sort of refreshing. But this, this is much more true to life, it's much more down to earth. They were all fighting for a common cause, and they were all lumped together when we're sort of introduced to the unit. Everyone's from a different section of the army. You've got there's a young lad who's in the Navy. There's an older soldier he's from the Chemical Corps. So they're all really ragtag ad hoc force. Kenneth Spencer plays Wesley Epps, who's the black soldier. He was an opera singer by trade. He found fame post-war in Germany. Robert Taylor is your big star. He plays Sergeant Bill Dane.
I really like him in this.
He's really good, yeah. He was a former radio star, and he actually trained US Navy pilots after the film. So they all contributed to the war effort. And then Desi Arnaz is another big name.
Yeah, big household personality, wasn't he?
Yeah, I Love Lucy.
The 50s onwards.
Massive, yeah. He plays Felix Ramirez.
I think the smattering of units that they're all from is really interesting. So you've got Robert Taylor, who's playing Sergeant Bill Dane, and he's with the 31st Infantry. Then you've got an Army Air Corps lieutenant who is fixing his scout plane, I think it is. I'm not sure what kind of plane it is.
How just come out of nowhere that plane?
That's something we'll probably talk about later. That's a bit odd. Then we've got, as you mentioned, you've got Corporal Jake Feingold, played by Thomas Mitchell, who was in the Chemical Corps, which is really interesting. The Chemical Corps was responsible for things like smoke barrages and that kind of thing. Provisional Signals Battalion in there. Lots of cavalry units. As you mentioned, we got Robert Walker, who was a musician, second class Leonard Perkett, who is an absolutely irritating character in this film, I think.
Yeah, he is. Oh, such a moaner, isn't he?
Oh, I just hate that character so much. But
I think you're meant to.
He plays an important role, but goddamn.
I think he's like the voice of the person who doesn't agree that they're at war. He's very
naive.
Yeah,
very naive, definitely. We've got Desi Arnaz, who was National Guard, interestingly.
Yeah.
192nd Tank Battalion. Then we got a cook. We got someone from the Medical Corps, and then a couple of guys from the Philippine Army.
Yep.
Corps of Engineers, and also we've got Corporal Todd, who is also ex-infantry, but now sort of just milling around.
And Dane thinks he knows him, but then that whole plot just fizzles out into nothing, doesn't it?
Well, they kind of sort of come to a resolution at the end where it doesn't go anywhere. There's no
pads a runtime, doesn't it, a bit?
Sorry, that was Lloyd Nolan, who is Corporal Todd,
right? And
he's the Provisional Signal Battalion attached to the 26th Cavalry.
Yeah.
So he's kind of basically his character is someone who's gone AWOL from the army after murdering someone in a card game.
Good lord.
And Dane, Robert Taylor, recognizes him because they were in the same battalion. There's a little bit of a simmering story where Dane continuously hints that he knows that Todd is actually this guy called Danny Burns. And then finally, when Burns is killed, or when Todd's killed, he kind of makes peace with him. Yeah,
he does.
He sort of says something like, "I thought for a minute you'd stuck me in the back." Yeah, it was actually a Japanese soldier. It's just that bit doesn't really work, but it kind of adds another layer on top of everything else.
They all get their little time to shine, don't they? They all get a little kind of plot of their own. They either say, "Oh, I want to do this," or "Oh, I'm going to get that plane running and escape," or something. The
Army Air Corps lieutenant who wants to get his plane up and running and escape to Corregidor. So, do you want to go over the plot briefly?
A sentence hypnosis is that it's just the story of Sergeant Dane's squad and his ragtag American servicemen and in their delaying action to deny the oncoming Japanese forces the use of a bridge. So it's quite simple. It's quite a simple plot, really, but it's more about them as a unit and banding together to fight this really overwhelming force.
The first two acts of the movie are basically like a character play, aren't they?
Like if you've seen Long, the Short, and the Tall, it sort of plays out like that a little bit.
Mm.
But there's a nice opening, like scrolling text, and I've got it here. It says, "When Japan struck, our desperate need was time to marshal our new armies. 96 priceless days were fought for us with their lives by the defenders of Bataan, the Philippine army, which formed the bulk of MacArthur's infantry, fighting shoulder to soldier with the Americans. To those immortal dead who heroically stayed the wave of barbaric conquest, this picture is reverently dedicated." Immediately reading that, it's obvious that it's propaganda piece as well.
Yes.
As we mentioned, it comes out in well, I don't know if we've mentioned yet, it comes out in quite an important part of the war in the Pacific. You know, America started island hopping, things are turning around. Look at what we've already done. Look at what we're already doing. Let's keep doing it so the war's won. That's what I get from it.
Yeah, no, you're right. And there's elements in there where they're like explaining to the audience why they need to keep fighting.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting thing that Lloyd Nolan's character Todd does, where he's sort of like the dissenting voice throughout, because he's, you know, sarcastic and kind of army weary. You know, I get the feel.
Yeah, battle fatigue, definitely.
And there's an interesting point where he's talking about how tough it is for everyone back home, you know, and the sacrifices they've got to make in like the most sarcastic tone possible, saying to the audience, you should be making these sacrifices. You know, these men are on the front line fighting and dying.
Yeah.
To, you know, preserve freedom.
And then later on, it really hits you over the head with like, look, these guys are really suffering. You know, like they are genuinely, really like, you know, putting their all in. So the least you can do is, you know, buy a war bond, something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean that they all die. Spoilers, but they all die, which is rare for a movie of this age.
They're all picked off, aren't they, one by one?
They're all picked off one by one.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, one of the parallels with Lost Patrol.
Mm-hmm.
Lost Patrol's set in the desert, by the way.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's not
a like for like remake.
No. There's a lot of money for MGM to drop to then not even feature scenes that they'd paid to use from the Lost Patrol. It's a bit of a weird.
Yeah, somewhere online I read it that said that scenes from the film
are in it.
The Lost Patrol have been included. There's no way. There's literally nowhere in Bataan where any of Lost Patrol would have fit in. It just makes sense. But anyway, so don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Doesn't make sense.
They're in like the Mesopotamian desert or somewhere like, I can't remember exactly where Lost Patrol is set, but it's set in an oasis.
Yeah, exactly.
They're defending an oasis, and with Bataan, they're defending sort of like a rocky outcrop that overlooks a bridge. The platoon sort of digs in.
Yeah, they're digging bloody far from their bridge, don't they?
They do, and it's, you know, they don't pick the best position.
Not really,
but so they dig in. The bridge is actually blown by the engineers who are with them
right at the start.
Some demolition charges.
Yeah,
which is quite some spectacular model work. Actually, it's quite good.
Nice.
You know, that very same night, the Japanese start rebuilding the bridge because they need to get across to carry on chasing MacArthur and the retreating army. From some of the shots and the setup shots, it's very difficult to see how some of those lines of sight that the machine. I think what you're supposed to get from it is that their machine gun positions are basically very slightly set back from the edge of the ravine that they're defending.
Right.
But then later on, when the Japanese attack, they're clearly covering out. They're coming out of a jungle, and they have, you know, probably like 400 yards worth of, you know, open ground that they're covering. I think it's just the way that the scenes have been blocked, that they kind of forgot that they're supposed to be facing the bridge.
Yeah, because it seems like the Japanese have already come over the bridge.
Yeah,
it's confusing.
Exactly.
So I thought at one stage they were in like the gully underneath the bridge. Like that's where I thought they were defending, because I thought that's the only way the Japanese troops would have got across.
Yes, they'd have to go down the ravine and then up the other side of the ravine.
But then there's some points where they're setting up machine gun positions above them.
Yeah, and so there's a point where there's a machine gun nest, a very precariously placed machine gun nest in a pair of trees. And, you know, there's about 6 Japanese guys up there, 3 on the machine gun, 2 riflemen. And they've set up like some planks between 2 trees. And they're sort of like, and, you know, lucky grenade gets those guys. But how did they, unless they were on the other side of the ravine?
It's confusing.
Perhaps that position was on the other side of the ravine. I don't know, because it's not super wide. The span of the bridge is probably like 2 or 3 arches, but it's very steep. So how did the Japanese get from that side?
The geography is all over the shop. I mean,
Unless this is my outside theory coming into this. This is perhaps some headcanon that the Japanese have outflanked them at another pass further down the river.
Okay.
And they've pushed up this way. So
yeah, possibly.
There's a crossing further downstream or upstream. That's, you can get some men across,
but not tanks or trucks.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing heavy.
Okay.
But they need that bridge. They need the narrowest part of the ravine, and they need the bridge built.
I'm going for that. That's how they got there. That makes sense.
There's some FOF headcanon for Bataan.
We like a bit of FOF making it up. They're entrenched by this point. And they've got 3 heavy machine guns, which
they do.
are Vickers MGs. Unfortunately, they should be Browning M1917s.
Well, that's what MGM's fantastic armory had.
Yeah. If you've been looking at the Twitter, we've got a fantastic picture of guns from the MGM armory.
Yeah, sent in by a listener, Al.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for that, Al. Brilliant. Check that out if you haven't. So we were trying to work out whether those weapons, the Vickers MGs that were in there, were the same as this one.
I think they were. I think it's almost certain because it's another MGM movie, and they're quite clearly Colt Vickers M1915s. Because that's what's shown in the MGM photo, the armory photo. And obviously, I think what they've done is they've mocked them up with Browning smooth jackets, but they've quite clearly still got the 2 spade grips at the back rather than just the single pistol grip that Browning has.
Well, there's a proper Browning at the start, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
That's nice. In an anti-air roll, it's quite cool.
That whole scene's brilliant.
Brilliant. We'll come on to that later. So yeah, we've already alluded. They get picked off one by one. And right at the end, you've got Robert Taylor on his own. Like he gives him a drummer Thompson, doesn't he? The oncoming Japs, and then he swings
empties the
around.
whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely, just giving it some. And then it fades out. The movie fades out with him sort of shouting at him to come get him, firing the Vickers gun. And then it fades out, and the end scroll is. So fought the heroes of Bataan. Their sacrifice made possible our victories in the Coral and Bismarck seas at Midway, on New Guinea and Guadalcanal. Their spirit will lead us back to Bataan.
As MacArthur said, I will return.
He did say, I will return. And John Wayne went back there.
He did in Back to Bataan. But I really like that end shot with the zoom in on the muzzle of the MG. It's really quite effective. And the score over the top and the boom of the gun, it really is effective.
The sound design's actually really nice, isn't it? Time hasn't been kind to the print or the sound. The actual the listening to the sound isn't not very clear these days. Yeah,
some of the sound effects actually reminded me of films like All Quiet on the Western Front. Some of the whistling for the bombs and the rifle fire, some of that. The original from the 30s kind of reminded me of that.
When the grenades go off, though, it looks like bloody, an atom bomb's gone off.
Yeah, we got that classic trope of grenades doing way more than they would do.
God, when they lob the 2 grenades at the bridge to get that truck, it looks like they've hit it with a howitzer.
So so there's a couple of things with that scene. It's one of the ones I was going to bring up, and I was thinking, well, how have they managed to throw the grenades that far? And what is in those grenades? Because they really go up. And they take out everything that the Japanese have built. So that the base of the bridge is masonry, and then the top bit is sort of like wood. It's like a deck, isn't it? Yeah, and they're building it from the trees they put down locally.
That's it, yeah.
And they completely destroy it with like maybe half a dozen grenades. That's a job for mortars. They should have had like a mortar team.
Yeah, well, they didn't have barely anything, did they? Them guys.
They really should have had. That would have been the ideal weapon for taking out what was after that bridge or rebuilt bit.
They were fighting a defensive battle, so I assume they'd might have exhausted some of their stocks.
Well, yeah. I mean, they were quite. I mean, the patrol, as they keep referring to it, rather than
patrol
platoon or squad. But yeah, they don't patrol. Maybe that's why they bought the rights to Lost Patrol.
Oh, maybe
because they refer to it as a patrol. I don't know. They are really well armed. They have those 3 machine guns. They have like 3 Thompsons, I think it is. Possibly
something like 4. That. Yeah, Thompsons just keep appearing when it suits the plot.
That's the role of any good Thompson in a war movie, isn't it? Really.
Truth. Yeah.
Plenty of grenades. and Springfield 1903s. And what I think is really interesting about Bataan in that respect is it's one of the few films that show what some American servicemen looked like at the beginning of the war. So they're in 1917 pattern helmets. They've got Springfields. That's really interesting. I think it sort of sets it apart from other American World War II movies where they've all got the M1 helmet and they've all got the M1 Grand. So kind of gives it a different visual aspect.
Yeah, they're only wearing webbing belts and sort of they've some of them got machetes because you're in the jungle and they haven't got like M41 jackets on yet or anything like that. It's just got their shirts for tropical shirt sort of look. So should we move on to the alley tally this week?
Yeah, I think we can leap off into a number of sections from the alley tally.
I think we can.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So what's your pick this week, Robbie?
Well, we've already mentioned the Vickers guns. I mean, it's just always nice to see a lot of Vickers guns being British. They love the Vickers gun. Wasn't necessarily alley as like, oh, really cool bit of kit, because obviously we know that units had dedicated heavy machine gun crews and teams and all that. But what I thought was only on the second watch earlier was the way that they actually use the MGs, because then they like knock it off. So like they have like a little burst, and then I think it was
Epps, yeah,
Epps, yeah. He knocks off and then shoots like a burst and then knocks it off again.
He does. He's kind of. I don't know why he does that.
That's how you do it, isn't it?
I don't know. We're gonna have to ask our friend Rich Fisher because he'll know much more about this than we will.
I remember watching a thing when I was little, and they said was it Julian Thompson, one of his documentaries. He was like, I was taught to fire a Vickers, but you fire a burst, knock it off an inch, fire another burst.
All right, okay. So it's like you're covering a field of fire.
Yeah, that's it. It might be wrong.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, some of them have clearly got the traverse like fairly loose.
Oh yeah, they're like proper raking it.
They're sweeping with it almost. And he does seem to like tap the spade grip to sort of like move it and traverse it left and right, doesn't he?
No one's looking directly into the sights. They're like quite looking over the gun.
Yeah, they're firing over. Yeah, definitely.
To actually see what they're hitting. I quite like that.
So many close-ups of them letting rip with the Vickers, though, aren't there?
Really nice.
The guns, but I think the guns are almost one of the main characters. They get that much screen time.
I mean, those guns are anyway because it's their only heavy weapon, and they make a lot of their stands. They repel a lot of attacks in their Vickers gun pit, don't they?
They do, yeah.
Sorry, Browning pit. So my second one. And this is following on from last week a little bit. If you were on the Twitter this week, we had the MP40 mystery, and then we solved the MP40 mystery of Go for Broke. Thanks, Al, again for that picture. There's another MGM mock-up gun. Late on in the film, there's a big hand-to-hand combat sequence, and this Japanese soldier jumps into shot, and he's got I thought it was a Thompson. But it's like a mocked-up Thompson with a really long barrel. And the barrel's a little bit like fluted.
Yeah, it's supposed to look like machine gun, isn't it?
Yeah, like a Type 96. But he doesn't even get to fire any shots off with it. He gets killed.
Well, he gets killed in a spectacular way. He gets a rifle sling like wrapped around his throat. And
he does, yeah.
That's 101 for hand-to-hand fighting. That always make sure you get your rifle sling around the enemy's neck in order to strangle them.
Absolutely brutal.
Yeah, there's that great scene with Dane, who he's hand-to-hand fighting with 2 or 3 Japanese soldiers.
Yeah.
And he breaks his rifle over one, and then there's another shot of him where you can quite clearly see that both his bayonet is broken off and the rifle stock, as the butt's broken off his rifle stock.
Yeah.
And then he still shoots a Japanese soldier with the gun. He just turns around and shoots him on the floor.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some really visceral like hand-to-hand stuff.
Yeah, it's. I mean, maybe
that's actually my favorite scene. One of my favorite scene picks. So we'll come back to that. But there is supposedly another mock-up gun, isn't there?
Do you want to go into that one? Because I don't believe it still.
I don't know. Like when I was looking up the film, I noticed online on IMFDB, because we only consult the most quality of sources for this podcast.
We love a crowdsourced open source website that anyone can doctor.
To be fair, read them and then you can make your own decisions.
Definitely.
We're historians. We know what we're doing.
Yeah, we will.
Apparently, Dane's 1911 A1, his Colt sidearm, is actually a mocked up revolver made to look like a Colt 1911. Now, if you've ever seen a Colt 1911, you'll know that they look nothing like revolvers.
No.
Especially not like snub-nosed Colt detectives, which is what it's supposed to be inside this sort of like mocked up shell. And I thought that's just bollocks. That's not right.
If you ever had a cap gun when you were little, it was a Colt detective.
Mm-hmm.
Little plastic cap gun. They're all based on that.
But I thought, no, there's no way. So I was watching it. I thought, okay, we're coming up to that scene where he shoots the 1911. It's in the middle of that set piece. And there's a number of enemy soldiers coming towards him, and he shoots them from behind a fallen tree. And it's a really good scene. It's a really good scene. And I thought, hang on a minute, that Colt's pretty fat. That is a fat Colt. What's going on here?
It's a chunky boy, isn't it?
It was a thick Colt.
Yeah.
So there's this, like, he sort of turns a little bit.
Yeah.
And it looks like a good 1.25 inches wide. And I thought, wow, okay. So maybe there is
this theory's
revolver inside that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the source was for
Al,
like deciding that it was
pictures from the armory.
That's definitely not in Al's photograph from the armory. But I don't know how they worked out that there was a revolver inside. But I did notice when you look at it, the slide doesn't move and the hammer doesn't move.
Okay.
So that's a dead giveaway that the gun's actually not like cycling.
Right. Fair enough. I didn't actually notice that.
You wouldn't necessarily see the slide move because it's quite quick.
Yeah.
That's the nature of semi-automatic handguns. But
of course,
you can get a good idea that something's not quite right with this thick Colt.
I mean, if any FOF listeners have got the movie on DVD or video, pop it in, have a look at that bit, let us know. Again, we'll pop a picture up on the Twitter, I think, when we do. We want your opinions because we think these MGM mock-up weapons are just crazy.
They're fascinating. I love it. Like those mad lads in the MGM armory were just having a whale of a time, just like making up completely replica Sten guns, making Thompson's like Japanese Type 92 like machine guns, mocking up Brownings, just having a great time. Oh, we need an MP40 for this film. Don't worry. Stand in the machine shops making a casting of an MP40 right now. We'll just put a rising M50 in there. No bother. Like, just brilliant.
In the MGM like offices, oh, I know, I need an M1911. Oh, don't worry, I'll just go down the shop and buy one. It's the most popular handgun in the world probably at this point during the war. There's thousands of them. No, that's too easy. we got to make one. Stan's a dab hand with a welding tool. He'll do it for you.
And he does a great job. Like it does for all intents and purposes look great. Exactly like a 1911. It had me fooled.
Do you think like they got a real one, like pressed it in a resin mold and then poured the liquid metal in, like really went over the top?
I bet they did, that's a good point. I bet that's probably how they did it because I can't think of how they got the detail. So
could that be like some sort of maybe insurance thing where the actor's concerned?
If you can fire a revolver, you can fire a 1911, surely.
It's really odd.
If you're like mowing down Japanese soldiers with a Thompson, what's the issue with a Colt? Like,
it's really odd, isn't it?
So I don't think it's going to be insurance, but it's
weird,
really bizarre. Unless it was like ammunition availability. Maybe they didn't have 45 blanks on hand.
Possibly.
But wait, the Thompson's chambered in 45, so they would have 45 blanks.
Oh God, the plot thicker.
So any way you try and look at this, it's kind of confusing.
Or maybe those scenes were shot on a different day and they didn't have the armory there.
Maybe.
We'll never get to the bottom of that one, I don't think.
Maybe it's a proximity thing where they were shooting close to other actors.
Oh, maybe.
So they wanted to do it with a 38 or a 32.
Like a less of a flash at the discharge. That makes more sense. Yeah.
But it's the 40s. They didn't care.
No. And why go to all the trouble to make a housing for a revolver?
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's impressive work.
We love it. We love it on FOF. We love a bit of that. So Matt, did you have any other alley picks this week?
Thompson's got to be the Thompsons.
I mean, yeah,
like it's just there's so much really great Thompson action. So the M1928 A1s, I think, and they have the original, so like pistol foregrip, and the big drum mags,
proper Chicago typewriters.
Yeah, and we know the MGM Armory had those because they're in the photo. There's so many great shots of the Thompson just absolutely mowing down enemy soldiers.
Yeah.
And the way they've all been, these shots have been framed are really nice. So they're either like straight on ahead shots with the guy behind the Thompson, and it's just blaring, or there's sort of sweeping shots where you can see what you know. And there's some really good shots from behind them as well, where they're stood on like the parapet and that he's literally hosing down.
Well, that's just like pro-America propaganda, isn't it? Yeah, and that's what that is, I think.
Well, yeah, it's an impressive sight, and they would have thought that's impressive. This is like firepower.
Yeah, I think so.
We want to portray that the guys, they've got the best available, and that they're doing what they can with.
That's it. Yeah.
A good old American Thompson. but yeah, so that's my pick.
No, that's good. The never reloading trope is very strong as well. I don't think I ever saw anyone reload those Thompsons.
Never saw anyone put a fresh belt in any of the Vickers either.
They did not. I mean, you have to cycle the bolt on a rifle anyway. So I mean, they did that.
There is some of that though. I'll give them that. There is some like the cycling of the Springfields, but you never see anyone put in like another stripper clip.
No, you don't.
Never.
No. And I also really like the end shot where Taylor's, he goes a bit mad, doesn't he? Because I think he's kind
of like laughing, isn't he, when he's firing that Thompson?
On. Yeah, he's got his grit in his teeth. But the camera zooms into the Vickers gun that he's on, and he actually like mouths or shouts "sons of bitches," but it's drowned out by all the machine gun fire. And apparently, at the time, that was a massive thing to get past the censor, because at the time, probably quite a big swear. I'm not sure on 40 swears. I mean, I don't
know what like American cinema regulatory sort of things were going on in the mid 40s, but yeah, that's interesting.
Fave scenes, fave parts. So, Matt, you want to go first?
There's some absolute crackers. I mentioned earlier that it sort of goes, first two acts are basically a character play where we get to know the men, get to know each of the individuals. We'll talk a bit about that in a bit. But it opens up with a really nice set piece scene, and it's sort of the main set piece battle of the film is really impressive. I think it's like, I first watched this movie, I think, with my granddad when I was a kid.
Right.
Like a Saturday afternoon film. Probably on TCM or something like that. And I always remember it fondly, and I really enjoy the film still. Like it's just there's a nice bit of character development, and then really impressive sort of like set piece scene. It's all studio bound.
Yeah. So
we know that much.
I thought the start maybe wasn't.
No, the start definitely isn't, and that's sort of like the exception to to it. But that set piece, I really love it. So it begins with they sort of like realize that the trees are moving, slowly the trees appear to be sort of like getting closer and closer to them, and the tension begins to ramp.
The first couple of shots, you're not blinking, you'll miss it. And then the Japanese camouflage guys coming up. It's quite scary, really. Not now. It looks a bit.
Well, for then it would have been, it would have been something definitely, because they've had this drummed into them that you've got to fear the Japanese menace, and they're sneaky, and they're going to murder you. And we'll talk a little bit about the propaganda element of the film in a minute.
Yeah.
But so the tension's ramping, the enemy are coming up closer and closer, and Taylor, Sergeant Dane, tells them to fix bayonets. So they all fix bayonets. Robert Walker's character, the sailor, makes a joke about waiting to see the white of their eyes. It's kind of like there's a little bit of a racist element to it. It's like, do the Japs have whites of their eyes?
Yeah.
It's a couple of those little fairly like racist.
We can forgive it. It was shot during
tropes.
the war.
Well, it's literally propaganda. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. Definitely worse propaganda, anti-Japanese propaganda than that.
Yeah. And Dane's telling them to hold it. He's hold your fire. wait for them. I think it was like 1, 2, okay, and they all open up. So there's a couple of Thompsons, 3 MGs going, and they absolutely blast the tree line. And the Japanese are like literally like right up on them at this point, and they absolutely lay the whole line of them down.
Absolutely point
and
blank.
all hell breaks loose.
Yeah,
and it's just a hell of a scene. So you got the chatter of the Thompsons, you got the boom of the MGs, you got grenades flying around everywhere, you got stick grenades coming in, going out, you got US grenades getting like pulled through the teeth, and like they're just like lobbing them at everybody.
But I like the way it's framed as well, because it's a nice. You can see that there's only 3 of them, or 4 of them against this horde of Japanese troops.
Yeah,
and then they bring the fight. The US, the Americans, they bring the fight to the Japanese. I just think it's great framing. It's really nice. There's some really nice shots.
There's a couple of angles in there, isn't there? There's the shot over the heads of the men of the Japanese coming on.
Yeah,
and there's a sort of frontal shot of the guns firing, and then there's that great shot of when they sort of sally forward and do a bayonet charge.
That's it, yeah. And that just developed into some absolutely brutal hand-to-hand combat for the time.
It's really visceral. We got to talk about Kenneth Spencer's character, Private Epps, and how he dies, because that is really striking. Main battle sequence. They're all sort of individually fighting hand to hand, having a good time of it as well. You know, the odds are not on their side, but you would never know it.
No, they're mowing people down, aren't they?
Yeah, and it cuts to Private Epps, who parries a bayonet thrust, knocks a man down, bayonets him, and then it snap cuts to his face as a Japanese officer's sword strikes the back of his neck, and he screams, and it cuts away instantly.
Yeah, that's what you get. Yeah,
it's really effective. Like, really, it's just really impressive. Both on a cinematography level, but also the fact that they portrayed that kind of visceral sort of like death.
I mean, I know they screened the movie to Bataan veterans, and they approved it, and they said it's quite true. But there's a New York Times critic called Bosley Crowther, and he said, this time at least, the studio hasn't purposefully prettified facts. This time it has made a picture about war in true and ugly detail. There is sickening filth and bloodshed in it. I only saw it the first time last week, and I was like, bloody hell, 1943.
It's a blood-curdling scream as well. There's quite a few really blood-curdling screams.
I think it's one of the first Japanese who gets bayoneted. I'm not sure who bayonets him, but you actually see him stick a bayonet in him. And I was like, really? Like,
you do,
hell.
and he sort of like gets pushed to the side with the bayonet.
Yeah. There's a lot of people get hit with rifle butts. You know, they're really playing that up, saying he's fighting the Japanese might get hand to hand. I mean, a lot of accounts of that war.
Well, it definitely did at Bataan.
Brutal. Yeah,
that fighting retreat. Good. Some of the stuff I've read about that was just
really,
so close quarters, just absolutely terrifying. I love that main sequence, but there is a slight criticism. Like some of the sequences of the bayonet fighting look almost sped up.
Okay.
I don't know whether you picked up on that.
No,
but there's some bits that are almost comically sort of like sped up. And there's a sequence where one of the men, don't know who it was because it's a shot from behind him, so you don't really see, but he throws his rifle at 2 oncoming Japanese men.
Oh yeah. And
it hits them, and they don't actually know what to do. They kind of fall over, and then he kicks them, but it's sped up, and it just looks.
Oh, I have to go back and watch it.
It's just there's only maybe 2 or 3 parts of that sequence that does that. Maybe they shot it slow because they were choreographing the throw.
Yeah.
And then they just sped it up, but it's off with the rest of the sequence. But that's just something I noticed. So, what's your favorite scene, Robbie?
Well, so my favorite part is the opening sequence where you've got the stream of like refugees and retreating troops, and there's a couple of guys with a Browning M1917, and they're just chatting away. The 2 guys in the MG pit with I think it's a captain or someone who comes to see them, and then you hear a plane, and everyone looks up, and they sort of look up, sort of half, sort of happy, maybe sort of curious, and then they quickly see that it's diving, and you hear the plane start to dive, and then the column gets shot up, the little shack hut thing gets blown up.
Yeah.
And it's really well done. The sense of scale of that sequence is really,
Yeah, it's one of the
really
few
good.
scenes I think aren't studio bound,
Yeah, it has to be.
because you can see the distance and it looks real. It's not a painted background.
No.
But that whole sequence is amazing.
Yeah.
So there's some elements in that I noticed that it's really visceral, and that kind of hints at what's coming later on.
Oh, it does, yeah.
There's a guy with one leg missing, badly wounded, and he crawls under a building, and the building's on fire, and it collapses onto him.
Yeah.
And he has one of those blood-curdling screams again.
Mm.
And it's just, you're like, wow, okay. There's also a jump cut to a buried child.
Yeah, God, that
Child that's been buried alive.
Oh God, yeah, that hit me. I mean, I'm a new father, so I was a bit like, oh no, baby, oh no.
Well, exactly. That is the whole point of the film.
Yeah.
It's designed to make you hate the Japanese.
Mm.
And there's also in that sequence the ambulance gets machine gunned.
Yes, it does. Yeah. I mean, this is, reading about Bataan. The Japanese didn't have great conduct really in that. Well, they didn't have great conduct.
I'm not saying any of it's not entirely accurate.
No,
I'm just saying it's shocking to a cinema goer.
Mm.
But it's representing something that the US government wants to portray, is that the Japanese are
ruthless,
a ruthless enemy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's why we're fighting. And that's where the propaganda comes into it quite heavily, because there's a lot of derogatory terms about Japanese soldiers.
Yeah. It frequently refers to them as monkeys and baboons, doesn't it?
But that's reflected in the propaganda of the time. There's you look at the propaganda at the time, it is rife, sort of anti-Japanese sentiment, and it's not nice to hear it in 2021, but you got to look at it with 1943 eyes. You're trying to win a war, and I can understand why they did it, because it was trying to breed resentment to your enemy at home. So it's of its time. I think you can't really blame it for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of examples in the film, but possibly not as many as you might expect. There's a bit where Robert Taylor explains that they climb trees better than monkeys.
That's it. Yeah.
And and there's as I mentioned, the references to baboons and such.
It's like subtle. It's almost subtle at times as well.
There's numerous sort of mentions to the Japanese culture.
It's about Bushido and all that, and
there's little bits that they've interjected into the film. And there's the fact that they open fire on an ambulance that's killing wounded people.
Yeah,
so that's meant to engender hatred towards your enemy that is so ruthless.
And I assume it would be backing up things that had been reported about Bataan at the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you spray a column of people walking with machine gun fire in air attacks, then ambulances are going to get hit. Whether that was a policy, I don't know. But what I thought was interesting in that sequence itself was someone tries to take a rifle from a wounded man who's going into an ambulance, and he refuses to let go.
Yeah.
So I took that as to be like, that man's so frightened of being unarmed in the face of
Japanese,
the Japanese, that he's wounded, but he's keeping his rifle.
The Bataan Death March was absolutely horrific, and was very, very well. I don't know how well reported it was, but I might assume it would have trickled through by 43. So it's showing what these guys actually did before. They didn't just lie down, and sort of get captured. They really did fight hard. They were,
yes,
as a propaganda piece. I think it does its job. It's a lot more in your face than, say, Miss Grant Goes to the Door.
Yeah.
But Miss Grant wasn't staring down banzai attacks.
She'd have done fine though.
She'd have got her Enfield out and gone mad.
Should have got them all with a Webley. I think it's also interesting that Kenneth Spencer has quite a good role in this. His part is substantial. He has some interesting sort of things to say in the film. He's sort of like a fatherly figure almost in some scenes, and
he's just treated as an equal.
Yes,
he's just a part.
That's the most important part, I think.
Sometimes in movies of that era, you get like subtle digs, but you don't get any in this film. He's just Epps. That's who he is. He's the demolitions expert. He's shown as quite caring and, as you say, like a fatherly figure. He gives that really nice eulogy when the first man gets picked off, I think.
Was it the captain? I think it was.
I think it was, yeah. Yeah, because they all look at Dane, don't they? Like, oh, God, you're in charge now.
Yeah. Some of the development of the characters is interesting. So they all have sort of like their own sort of personality traits. The sailor is massively irritating, but he's always talking. I know he's young and naive, but he's always talking about.
I'm gonna bag me a jab. I'm gonna get me a jab. It's like, oh God,
that gets very grating. Like his obsession with getting a kill is just so much. It's just too much.
Yeah, his propaganda.
I can understand it though. I can understand why they wrote it like that. The cook's really good because the cook is played by Tom Duggan, and he's cook Sam Malloy of the Motor Transport Service, and he's basically just spits all the time, which is exactly what you want from a cook, isn't it? So he's spitting tobacco on the floor all the time, or juice or whatever it is.
And after Dane introduced himself to him, he just spits as he moves. I'm like, oh, he really got him.
I know, but he has one of the best lines in the film. So Dane asks him like, how's the ration situation, and he says, I'll tell you, there ain't no sugar for the coffee and there ain't no coffee. It's such a good line.
It's really good.
And later he shoots down a Japanese fighter with a Thompson.
Yeah, he does. Absolute legend.
But then he gets absolutely peppered by a machine gun across the river. They cram a lot in with those characters because then you've also got there's 13 of them for starters.
A big cast.
It's a big cast, and they try and give everyone a little something, which is, to their credit. It's easy to sort of lose track of some of them.
Yeah, I really did. I admit, by the end, I was like, oh, okay, this is the 3 characters that actually mean something that are left. You can sort of tell who's going to be last because they got more screen time.
Yeah, it's true. So you had Robert Taylor, Lloyd Nolan, and Robert Walker, the sailor, because you have that whole sort of subplot of them fixing the plane. So two or three of them are always working on that. And then you have the
Where
the
does
guy
that plane come from?
An airfield suddenly appears.
Like right behind them.
Yeah, like why aren't the Japanese landing on that airfield?
So weird. Because he's like, oh, and is it oh, not Salazar. Yeah, he goes, oh, I'll go back to headquarters and get some airstrikes called in. See you later.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, hang on, no, because there's an airstrip behind you, mate.
They know they're there, but he then disappears without orders. So he goes AWOL.
Yeah, he does.
And then later on, tragically, like in the next morning, he's like been caught by the Japanese and is strung up from a tree.
Yeah.
And the sailors, all gung ho, trying to open up on him, thinking he's a Japanese soldier.
I mean, the only thing I like about that plane sequence that I think is very weird, is the fact
that is a weird plot point. It adds sort of plot holes.
Yeah, it does. And then, but the good when it dives into the bridge and explodes, that looks good.
That model sequence is brilliant.
Really good.
The model work on the film's really good.
It's fantastic.
The scene where the enemy fighter plane crashes, that's good.
That's good.
The scene where they blow the bridge, that's great too. And they do at least sort of set up that bridge with a real scene shot. Like they walk across it. The captain and Dane walk across it. And
they do.
The captain sort of explain the mission and, But then I don't think the fact that the film is sort of on a soundstage is a huge negative anyway, because it's very well dressed set, very atmospheric when that fog rolls in.
Oh yeah, and you get all the graves. Oh God, yeah, that's it's foreboding. That's it's good. It's good foreshadowing as well for everyone. When you start seeing the graves, that's quite good. But yeah, maybe we're getting into final thoughts now, I think, possibly. So as last week, I mean, I'll kick off, but as was with Go for Broke, I just found it was too long. I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. The end battle sequences are really good. The start's really good. Introduction to all the squad's really interesting. And then to me, it sort of gets bogged down in their own personal little wars and things. And some characters I'm not really warm to. Others I just couldn't have told you what the hell they did. You know.
Well, they don't have enough time. Like,
no, they don't. Well, they've got 2 hours.
You blink and miss the reference to the medical orderly's pacifism.
Possibly cut the plane sequences as well, because it's just a bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason the plane sequence and plot point is in there is purely because they wanted a way to destroy the bridge more a second time after the demolition and the hand grenades.
And then that explains why it's never brought up again, because it really is put out of action. But then then again, on a positive note, to me, it reminded me of Battleground and Go for Broke, because there's a lot of sort of setting up, a lot of soldiers being soldiers, talking about things that aren't war, to then have a big old battle at the end.
It's that classic sequence of events, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with the couple of movies we've done in the last couple of weeks. I really like them, but I also find them really irritating and I think this is me as I don't know if I alluded to it last week, but me as I'm 28 nearly. Me as a movie watcher now sort of isn't the movie audience of 1943, because we've got TV, we've got streaming, we've got YouTube. Yeah. We can skip to the good
Everything bit. Has a plus 30-second button.
Exactly. So I'm not going to the cinema to sit down because I know.
Well, we're definitely not right now, that's for sure.
No. But I know I'm not consuming my only media at the cinema. So like I'm settling in for the news, then I'm settling in for the cartoon, then I'm going to watch the big feature. Like I have the option just to get up and go make a cup of tea and then come back and all that. And I think that's probably why I'm not enjoying these as much. But yeah, that's my 10 cents on Bataan.
I enjoyed it. I mean, it's a film I've seen as a kid.
Yeah, because I know you've got more of a resonance with it.
Like I watched it with my granddad years and years ago, and whenever it's on, I always sit down and watch it because it's an enjoyable film.
Yeah,
it's a classic Last Stand movie. It's an enjoyable like Sunday afternoon film.
Yeah,
where you can sort of be doing something else at the same time, and then pop back for pop into it now and then. Or it's got a good cast. The characters are
it has
fairly well developed if there's too many, but some good set pieces. So it's a solid film. And I think that whole propaganda element is interesting. It kind of comes to a head towards the end with Todd/Burns, Dane and the sailor, where the sailor's been wounded and Todd writes him a letter home. And he breaks down when he realizes they're all going to die because there's no escape from the situation.
Yeah.
And Dane takes over writing for him. We figure the men who died here have done more for the people of the world will ever know. It doesn't matter where a man dies, as long as he dies for freedom. So that's a great line, but it's quite clearly something that it's a propaganda line.
The redeeming feature of the movie is that it's as I said earlier, it's of its time, and that is really interesting to see a movie made during the war that it's portraying. Even if it is narrative, even if it is
fictionalized a little bit, yeah.
It's not a bad film. I have issues with it as a current day moviegoer, but what can you do?
Yeah, it's not there as one of those all-time great war movies. No, I agree with that. No. But it's enjoyable, and it's probably one of the few on-screen depictions we'll ever get of the Battle of Bataan, which is important.
Yes, and there are fewer movies about those more obscure
early sorts of campaigns. And I think it's important that those films exist because they kind of hopefully make people go, I want to know a little bit more about what this is portraying. So they go and read about it. Yeah. That's my hope always anyway. I always know it's a good film if I'm myself like sat watching it thinking, yeah, I really want to go and like look up more about this. I want to go and find what books are good about this.
Fire and Fortitude by John McManus. That's a really good film. That's a really good book for the Pacific campaign with the US Army mainly being featured in that. There's a lot on Bataan in that book. So I'd really recommend that.
Oh, great.
So there we have it, everyone. That's our look at Bataan this week. We really hope you enjoyed it. I mean, it's really worth a watch. It's a bit hard to find, I must admit. Coming from 1943, there's not a lot of good copies out there. But, please seek it out if you can. We're always available on the Twitter, @FightingOnFilm. Give us a like, a review, a subscription on whatever you're listening on, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening, guys.